Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. It's our live broadcast is this afternoon, but whenever you might be listening to a recording, thanks for taking some time out of your day to catch up with us. I'm Margaret Wise with ActiveProspect, and I'm joined today with Michele Shuster. And Michele, would you like to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I'm Michele Shuster with Murray Shuster, former Consumer Protection Chief in the Ohio Attorney General's office, and now I assist clients with compliance. And for those that don't come to us for compliance, we have a very active litigation group.
Awesome. Thank you. We always love having you on our webinars or podcast, and thanks for taking time out to do that. I think you mentioned your background with the AG office. I think just gives you such a valuable perspective of all sides of the table and really being able to work with your clients with that 360-degree strategy. Like you've helped craft the laws, you've helped enforce the laws, you've helped protect, all the parties that are involved in it. And so we always really appreciate that you've got that unique perspective bringing to our conversation. So glad to have you here today.
Very kind of you to say thank you. I have enjoyed all aspects of it, I have to tell you. I did not set out to be a telemarketing attorney, but I've never regretted it.
It's kind of interesting to get into this space. And I know a lot of companies don't necessarily maybe want to call themselves telemarketers, but they're like, we're not really telemarketing. We're like, but are you proactively calling consumers? So I think that's what we want to talk about today, right?
Right.
Where do you best fit in all of this, and how do you want to fit into this industry, and what's important to the companies? What's your risk tolerance, and kind of how do you want to identify and be identified? So.
Yeah. It's interesting talking about risk tolerance, because with the state of the law that we're going to be talking about today, a lot of the conversations we're having are, this is what the law says, but what it means could be something completely different. And so we're caging things in terms of what's your risk tolerance. This is the potential risk with decisions that are made. So this is a very timely topic on the types of things that we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. I think for me, for sure, when I think about sustainability, is about, you can do the letter of the law, but what's really sustainable for your business and for your customers and for your reputation and the way that you want to show up here. So that's awesome. Well, I would also love to hear from the audience a little bit, and we're going to run a poll. So that'll show up for everybody in chat here. And we'd like to hear who's on the line and get a little bit of feedback if you're a lead buyer, a seller, or if you do both. So if you just click on that vote now in the chat, and you can select an option there and then vote. And once you vote, you'll be able to see the results. So we'll kind of see what we get a little bit of mix here as everybody's chiming in and answering. All right, looks like we'll do a quick countdown here. 3, 2, 1, close that out. And we've got a great mix. It looks like we lean maybe a little bit more on the buy and sell and buy side, but we got a little bit of seller representation here as well. So I think that's good. Kind of thinking about that, Michele, one of the things that I wanted to just kick off and frame this is, what do you think about, we have this term bad actor, good actor and bad actor in the space. And I joined into this third-party lead gen area coming from a background of marketing technology and CRM and website implementation. So my orientation has been a little bit more tech. So I heard the phrase good actor and bad actor, and I just paused for a second, and I was like, oh, and I thought maybe that's just a term that we use here at ActiveProspect, kind of talking about the industry. And then I hear it from everybody, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is an industry term. And so when you think of that, what does that mean to you, or what do you associate with those terms?
Yeah. When I think of a good actor, because I think that's easier probably to define, that's somebody that takes the time to thoroughly analyze what is this process that they're engaging in? What are the legal requirements? And then even beyond that, what are the best practices? And when we're talking about lead generation, the types of things that we're really talking about have a lot to do with what the consumer's understanding is of this interaction that they're engaging in. And so I think the folks that are really on that high side of the good actor, they're following the law, they're following the best practices, and it's clear in the interaction that they're having with the consumer what's going to happen as a result of that for the consumer. The bad actors, I would say, On the high side of bad actors are the ones that are representing the information that they're sharing with the buyers is something they are not. We have been involved in cases where it was represented to the company that the telephone calls that they were transferring were all as a result of inbound calls from consumers, when in fact that was not the case. It was a outbound pre-recorded message campaign that was then being, when the calls came in, they would, or when they reached and they transferred those calls, they obviously didn't have consent for those, and so causes significant problems for the seller, and ultimately caused a lot of problems for that lead generator as well. So it's on that other side of the not a good actor when you're not letting the consumer know what's going to happen, or misrepresenting the quality and compliance aspects of a lead.
Yeah, definitely. I think a couple of points that we think about it when we talk with our customers is there transparent data collection through that process? Like, can you see all of that? We think about, are you taking some steps to use data for data accuracy, or you use services for data accuracy? So are you validating that? And then I think maybe the through line to that is, are you taking steps to help prevent fraud?
Yeah.
Right. And eliminate that out of the system with the idea that we're calling people who are expecting to be called.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there have been a lot of really good fraud prevention tools that have been developed out there in the market, ActiveProspect obviously being at the top of those. But, we are seeing a lot more concentration, especially because I think the lead buyers are demanding it. And, the large brands out there that are relying on the lead generation industry have needed to have that way of validating. And so we're seeing a lot more of that. I will tell you that I'll be doing a presentation here in a couple of weeks with one of those fraud tech companies. That sounds wrong, but fraud prevention tech companies, not in the same space as ActiveProspect, but they'll be releasing a report here soon. And it's just really even staggering still what's happening out there as far as fake leads and those types of things that ActiveProspect's just very good at identifying.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're going to post some links to your site and your information. So tell people to keep an eye on that for that fraud detection or fraud technology, fraud detection tech.
Yeah. I butchered it, but yes, that's exactly what it is. Yes.
To chime in for that. And for our products, with the Trusted Form products on that side, we have introduced over the last year or so a couple of things as Trusted Form Verify. And so I think some of our customers are maybe not as aware of it, but for those who might be listening and others, you can use those tools to detect some things. Is that consent box checked by the consumer, like actively opted into, or is that pre-selected, or is that assumed by submitting? And then also bot detection as part of that as well. And so that does some things to just kind of help filter at the very front end to say, are there some device fingerprinting, or there's some attributes that go into some detection to say, hey, this is likely. And so whether consumer or whether the lead buyers choose to filter or not, giving them more insights as to what it is that they're accepting, all kind of going into that transparent data collection and making sure that there's education and awareness and information being passed along with that lead.
Yeah. One of the things that's really critical with that too, and I'm sure you see it even more than me, but there are companies that will use the ActiveProspect technology for recording the lead, but then aren't retaining the actual lead forms beyond that by subscribing to the ActiveProspect account. And I think that's something that companies really need to be aware of and understand, that it's not just the activity of recording what's going on the website, but then actually retaining that information so that you do have that proof. It is extremely valuable in cases when you can produce those at the very beginning of the case. A lot of times that will result in defense counsel dismissing a case if you can show the quality, accuracy, and legitimacy of a lead. So just really critically important to take that extra step.
I'm so glad you said that. I want to comment on that, and then I want to ask you a follow-up to that. But we do that. It's a very common misconception that we run into people saying, oh, well, it has trusted forms, so therefore it must be consent.
Yeah.
We're like, no, because it's recording the activity, the lead capture, but you need to check if that's consent. So we tell our customers all the time, be looking at those certificates. You can both see the customer experience, see what the customer's seeing, and then you can also make sure that actually is capturing consent.
Yeah.
But the record keeping piece of it is, as well as people, we will have sometimes people come to us and say, hey, well, there was a certificate. We're like, but if it wasn't retained, there's not record keeping, so it's definitely connecting that to the record keeping aspects of it for the 5 years. So I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I'm actually going to skip down a section. I'm going to come back around to what we were going to talk about next, but because you brought that up, I think that's really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about what happens if there is a threat letter. But before I do that, I'd love to pull the audience again and skip to the poll around. I'd love to know if the people here have received a threat letter before. And if they did they settle? If they did, were they able to provide proof of consent back, or were they not able to do that? So that poll is up in chat for everyone, and we'll do a quick, give everybody a second to vote on that and see. Okay, it looks like a couple of no's and a handful of yes and provided proof of consent. Oh, and now we're getting a couple more in and settled. So a little bit across the board. Okay, so just kind of give a sense where our audience has experienced that. But that was a topic I really wanted to dive into a little bit, is particularly those that haven't. Like, what actually happens? How does that, how does that come to you as a company? And then what do you do? And then what maybe branches from that?
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of different flavors to how that happens, but let's just assume you've either from a pro se plaintiff, meaning just an individual who actually received the telephone call. The pro se plaintiff will send a letter, and we typically see form letters. There are a lot of form letters out there on the internet, in chat rooms and other areas where they'll just download those, change the name, and send it. And
so you're saying there are forums where professional plaintiffs are teaching other people how to go and do this?
Yes. There are several of them out there, and it's a group that really likes collaborating and sharing information. And so you can assume that if one of those pro se plaintiffs has sent you a threat letter, there's a likelihood that they've talked about it with others in those various forums. So, how you answer, and so that's one flavor, right? Mm-hmm. So we get it from a pro se plaintiff. The other is we get it from plaintiff's counsel, and so they've retained an attorney, and the attorney will put together a letter that lays out what their theory of the case is, why this call was not a legitimate call, why it was illegal. And frequently they won't start out with the demand. They'll just start out with, provide us information that you had consent to make this call, that this was a lawful call. And in either of those cases, the response that you provide, and I guess there is the third category, right? You get a letter from a regulator, which could be a threat letter, or it could be a civil investigative demand, which in and of itself is probably a threat letter, depending upon whether you're just a witness or you are the subject of whatever their investigation is. But all of them, they all have the same kind of common theme as to how you need to respond to those. Obviously, you go back, you investigate the call, you make sure that you actually did make the call. Believe it or not, sometimes they get it wrong. And there are a lot of companies that sell similar types of services out there where we have received threat letters and there's just zero evidence of the call, or that the number was associated with our clients. So you got to make sure that you actually verify that the call was made. And then it's a matter of pulling together all the facts as to, why was that call placed? Is it a telemarketing call? If it's a telemarketing call, did you have an exemption? Maybe they're a current client, or they've made an inquiry or something like that. or if not, the exception to the do not call laws for that, do you have the consent that you need? And so obviously ActiveProspect plays in their lead ideas plays an important part in that, being able to provide that type of information to whoever has sent that threat letter is critical, because the best possible outcome is to shut those down immediately. And, we've been in this space for so long. We know pretty much every plaintiff attorney out there that's filed more than one or two lawsuits. And so you build a reputation and a rapport because you need to, and you need to make sure that they trust you on the information that you're providing to them. So the conversation then starts as to why this was a lawful call. And hopefully you have that type of information. If you don't, then the conversation could go in a very different direction, that maybe this was a one-off, or we understand we might have had an issue here, but this is why this is different. A lot of times too, I would say with the professional plaintiffs, those plaintiffs that are, their names we see all over the trade sheets that provide you with all the cases that have been filed for that day. And, a lot of them are taking active steps to, set up these causes of action. They'll find the bad lead forms, meaning the lead forms that don't use language that's likely to prove that there was consent. And so they may fill those out. A lot of them will use false names. And so you really have to be a good detective, a good investigator when you're responding to those types of things. I would tell you that, maybe 25% of the time you're effective at shutting those things down at the threat level, or at least getting them to reconsider the filing of a class action, because I consider that a win. If you've taken something that's been threatened as a class action and it becomes an individual claim that makes that threat go away, that also just that is absolutely a win. So all of that to say, how you respond to that initial threat and be able to prove that you have made a legitimate call is so important. And like I said, that's maybe 25% of the time.
I heard a couple of things, I think, on a panel that you were on, that I heard you at a compliance conference, and I heard the term TCPA baiters. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And that kind of, if you aren't as familiar with some of that, that's a pretty self-explanatory term. Something else I heard was, if you get a threat, and even if it seems kind of crazy or out there or whatever, it was, don't ignore it. So I thought that was a pretty good tip as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ignoring it is the worst possible thing that you can do.
Yeah.
You see the attorneys out there that are filing the majority of these types of TCPA cases, and they are literally set up like mills. This is something where it's the same complaint, pretty much different facts, same type of discovery requests, same type of information that's generally used at trial. There's obviously always the little, unusual facts that are in every case, but they're set up to process lots of these high volumes. And if I had a dollar for every time I was talking to a plaintiff's attorney that was meeting with their contractor for the next house that they were building from these, I know, right? It's just not right. And it just goes to say how frequently they're doing these and how much they're making. And because it's really the attorney's fees at the end, the attorneys are the ones that are profiting most in these cases. The plaintiffs themselves usually get, less than $100. The class members less than $100, and even the representative class member, you're talking about only thousands.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about being able to sustainably manage leads and purchase leads, you got to figure out how to avoid all of that using technology, having a great response program set up. But if you put your AG hat on for a minute, is this really driven by just private right of action? And do you think if that changed, would the industry change to a degree, or do you think, like, just take it off the table, that's never going to happen?
So, it's amazing to watch how the whole regulator process and cooperation has changed over the years. Because really, it's only since 2003 that we were paying much attention at all to the do not call laws as regulators. It's when the federal law went into effect and the states had all of their versions of that as well. And so there were some initial big, big buzz cases that came out. Then there was a little bit of a lull, but now that is very different. And there is cooperation like we have never seen before on the federal level with the FTC, the FCC, all of the state attorneys general. Some states it's in the governor's office, but whoever's filling that kind of law enforcement role at the state government level. And I'm sure people have heard it, the anti-robocall task force. They meet regularly, and through the National Association of Attorneys General, they meet at least once a year, and the FTC and FCC and the consumer advocacy groups are all invited to that. There is a public day for that if anybody ever wants to go to one of those NAG meetings. Usually it's Monday, and they'll allow you an opportunity to speak too, which we have definitely done on behalf of trade associations in the past to point out things that we thought were not happening the way that they should be on the regulatory front. And so, they work in very close cooperation. They share databases. The anti-robocall task force has standing subpoenas with the industry traceback group. And so they see what tracebacks are coming. They work with platforms out there that identify, we call them honeypots, right? Umail, Raptor, those types of things. And so the AGs are provided with free access to all of that. So it's not just what they're seeing out there with the plaintiffs filing lawsuits, it's what they're getting from the industry through all of this information. And, when you're approached by the anti-robocall task force, there are 5 consumer protection chiefs on that telephone call, or whoever's heading up their telemarketing section within that. And, it's a pretty daunting thing to have 5 states that are demanding and telling you how things are going to be. And so it's important to come prepared for those types of conversations. If you ever do have one, you need to be loaded with facts. And while I always say that the regulators are not reasonable, they will listen to reason. And so if you can explain immediately, and I actually did have one where we used a lead ID and it made it go away. So if you can come prepared with those types of things, you can shut those things down rather quickly too. But you'll see in some of the cases that have happened here recently and that are still pending with that group that they are not hesitating to bring lawsuits as well. And I think there's a general frustration that some of the cases that they've pursued, they haven't been able to get damages because the plaintiffs seem to kind of disappear because they shut down their company and moved to different companies and have been pretty good at shielding those. So I can tell you there's a frustration with the AGs around those types of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One question I think that comes up is, do you feel like these are different conversations, or do you think, like we talked about, kind of that risk tolerance in the beginning of the difference between if you are practicing around exclusive leads versus getting shared leads? And where do you see some of the differences in that? And should you be managing your compliance differently? Should you be more or less concerned if you are in either of those areas?
It's so interesting to see where we've come from since the beginning of the one-to-one rules and logically and topically rules being introduced. And then on January 24th, when those were basically vacated and then stayed by the FCC, because the industry over that year where we were preparing for one-to-one consent logically and topically, the quality of the leads significantly improved. I'd be interested to know what you've heard, Margaret, about how those were converting in the tests that were happening. So I'd be really interested to hear that. But now that we don't have that, we're back to what has always been there, which is clear and conspicuous. The language in a lead has to be clear and conspicuous, and it needs to be readily apparent to the consumer what's going to happen as a result of completing that form. So they have to know what they're going to receive a call back and who's going to be calling them. And so, yes, you can have multiple sellers in a lead form, but it needs to be clear that they could be getting calls from all of those, all of those sellers or all of those callers. So we still really have to pay very close attention to our lead forms and be able to show that the consumer any reasonable consumer would have understood that by selecting this call to action button, and after reading that language, they were going to get a call. So obviously with the leads that are, single leads to a seller, much easier to show those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
The more sellers you have in a lead form, the more difficult. I think marketing partner lists are problematic. You really have to be careful if you're going to approve a marketing partners list. And whatever that call to action button is that the consumer is selecting, it needs to be clear that they're approving, they're providing consent to receive calls, not that they're submitting a sweepstakes form or, that they think they're going to be getting a free quote once they hit this button through the website instead of through a telephone call. So, be straightforward with the clients. And I think, the statistics probably show that those convert a lot better.
Yes. So you asked about that, and really, it was very interesting. We saw some slow movement in the industry overall towards preparing for this, and just a little bit of lack of urgency around it. But we did see a lot of we did still, even within that, we did see providers that were implementing this and testing it. And some of we got some numbers, statistics back, but we also got some benchmarks back. But we also got, even more than that, collected more anecdotal as well. And it's kind of, I guess, good news and bad news. The good news is the conversion rates were higher. Mm-hmm. And, when we look at it and look at our customers doing this, they're like, yeah, but we're paying more for leads. But what we heard from the ones that did test it was that overall the cost came down because they're not pushing so much through their pipes. They're not, pushing it through their systems into their call centers. And so they're having higher conversion of calls. And even to the point of, hearing that the morale in our call centers is higher because they're getting higher conversions. They're calling people that expect to be called. Yeah. And then, where I say there's a bad news on that is the bad news is when the state to the regulation went, people, didn't embrace that as much as it would have been nice to see, because we're always in support of what we were both saying there is the idea is that you are calling people that expect to be called. Mm-hmm. And if they are expecting to be called, then they will convert higher and you are in compliance. Yeah. And so even with that, it didn't change as much across the board. That we did see some providers say, hey, that we see this really working and we're going to stick with it and do it. But, kind of by and large, people went back to a lot of their, previous operating models, and that's okay. There's a lot of leads flowing through, and it certainly doesn't mean anybody is not compliant or this or that. It's just, it's always easier to kind of stick with, these are the KPIs we know, these are the benchmarks we expect, and we're going to choose predictability over maybe doing something different. But for companies that did do it and test it, we really did hear the positive results that we thought that we would.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I would say on that too is it's just really important to have somebody review your lead forms to make sure that, there are very technical requirements for leads. And so having them checked as that ounce of prevention is definitely worth the pound of cure on the other side of that.
Yes. We have some tools that help companies manage their consent language so they can centralize all that in, and they can take in leads, parse that consent language, match it to what's accepted. If it doesn't have a match, it can go into a queue and they can go in and approve all of it. So they can kind of build that library of approved and make it much easier to manage all of that, because it can be daunting to say what all is out there and how do we get our arms around all of that. It's super important, along with checking for that clear and conspicuous and, just managing all of that.
The other part of that, having that type of system, a lot of times litigation results is a result of mistakes. Good companies that had a process that went bad, and some of it is just around, has this language been approved or not? Mm-hmm. And, assuming or thinking that it had been approved when it had not. So having a system like that where where those leads are collected, where those lead forms are collected and managed and categorized is really important.
Yeah. And then, as you said, just go in and look at them, check them, know what's happening in there.
Mhm.
Don't just rely on the system, inspect it,
Mm.
make sure things are happening. So I'm going to switch over. We've got some questions coming in through Q&A. And so let's take a few of those. And then I want to ask you a little bit about kind of some big headlines or cases or looking forward, and then we'll wrap up from there. But a couple of the questions we have in here. This is a great one. We hear this a lot, and this got upvoted in our chat channel. I run a small company with limited budget. How can I ensure sustainable lead gen without a large compliance team?
Yeah, so I don't think it requires a large compliance team. It requires a good set of compliance policies and procedures. And so, not only does that help with compliance, but it also is a requirement of the TCPA. You're required to have policies and procedures in place to comply with those regulations. And so, when you're talking about a small company with a limited budget, and ensuring the sustainability of the lead generation, would you assume that's a purchaser of leads, Margaret, or would you assume?
Yes, I would assume that. Yeah, they're probably buying a little bit on the smaller volume side. They don't have dedicated resources. Like, let's say I'm buying a few thousand leads a month and we're dialing them, but I'm not. I can't afford somebody that's legal or to be on staff.
Yeah. Well, you definitely don't need to have them on staff. There are so many different resources and compliance companies and law firms out there. And it's not as expensive as you would think it is to review a campaign to determine if it is meeting the legal requirements. And most importantly, how we talk about it is that we talk about having a defendable position. That's really what it all comes down to. Do we have a defendable position so that when we get that threat call, we know exactly how we're going to respond? And so, that's not an incredibly expensive prospect, but these are the types of things that I would recommend just in general for somebody like the person that submitted that question is, make sure you have really good contracts. If you do run into trouble and you're the company that's been placing the call, there is direct liability for you. But there can be also vicarious liability. And so make sure you have contracts that have indemnification clause in it so that if the lead generator is not doing what they need to do, you have some recourse to them. Now, I will tell you, those indemnification clauses are only as good as the company that is providing them. I will also tell you that I ran into one of the insurance brokers that Otto Forrester is his name, that was talking about TCPA insurance and that it's become affordable for companies again. So I would recommend reaching out to your insurance broker and talking to them about TCPA insurance. Can be incredibly helpful, covers the defense costs, and usually damages up to a certain amount. So that's something that's helpful. And if you're going to have an indemnification clause, maybe requiring your lead generator to have that same type of insurance. And then it's really important that you read what the website is, what the lead form, whatever it is, and go through and make sure that it does meet all those requirements, that you have the language in there that TCPA or states require. And there's lots of resources online for that. Or as I said, that's not an expensive thing for an attorney to review. And then the last part is you really have to audit those campaigns. So, request that they provide you for a few calls every week, the lead form that they were relying on to place that telephone call, or for you to place that telephone call, so that that with that defendable position, we're going to have the documents we need to defend that. And if they're not able to produce it, or if something doesn't make sense, then there are a lot of lead generators out there that are doing it really well that you can work with, that are affordable.
Yeah. We had another question about pitfalls, and I think you answered quite a bit of that. But one thing I'll add to that is, you talked about the companies, the vendors, and how good are the vendors. And sometimes we hear from our customers is they say, well, I'll go back to the vendor if I get a threat. But to that point of preparing and having a plan, the record keeping is for 5 years. And if that vendor is not in existence anymore, they're definitely not paying to store your leads. And so,
oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how important that is.
And so, that is, really not a great plan in terms of thinking about you need to know the regulations. You need to create your plans, and then you need to review your process and map it to that. And that's one thing I think is a pitfall, and, relying on somebody that can professionally come in and help you review a plan is important to really understand that, and the vulnerability maybe in your plan.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important. And the FTC revised the telemarketing sales rule last year. So now it is 5 years. So excellent point that Margaret made. And then also in those record keeping requirements, the TSR is now specific as to who has that record keeping requirement. And whoever is placing the telephone call is the one required to keep that record. So, it could be a violation just because you weren't keeping the records as you were required to under the telemarketing sales rule. So
I feel like that's something that got lost a little bit in January discussions, is that you need to be in possession of that.
Yeah, you have to be in possession of it.
Yeah.
And there are very specific requirements for call detail records too, probably worth mentioning, how those are kept, what elements of call detail records are required. And of course, this happened, I can tell you from conversations with the FTC, because it would be, well, we have the call detail records. We don't have all of that. We don't need all of that. We can just tell you we called this person at this time, and then that's it. And the FTC has said that's not enough.
So kind of along these lines, that's them saying, hey, that's not enough. One of the questions that came in is, some of the complaints are telemarketing room styling practice, but if everything validates, why would a publisher be held accountable?
If the publisher has done everything right, so the publisher has the lead form, language was good, they provided that, they were able to provide proof of that, then publisher likely would not be liable. But again, I always encourage people to check their contracts, because sometimes it can be that as a publisher, you're responsible for any lead that's provided. And that includes if one of these plaintiffs that we were talking about earlier files a lawsuit, and it's because contractually you agreed to indemnify them for that lawsuit, you can become responsible. So generally it's the contractual obligation that you're looking there. If we want to look at vicarious liability, and that is the legal theory that brings parties in other than the called party. And so you would have to be looking at some additional levels of connection between the publisher and the call center. And generally, there has to be an agency relationship there. And that means a lot of different things, but it's basically a common law theory of agency that determines who's liable in those situations.
I think what we've seen in some of these situations, and I know you've seen it even to a much higher degree, is basically anybody with any money is going to get named. You're going to get wrapped up in it, and there's going to be, resources and distraction involved, whether they, ultimately get are able to extricate themselves from that, but they're going to have the distraction and the expense.
So true. I will tell you, though, there have been some, and we do this, push for penalties if we believe that somebody has brought in action that they didn't have a reasonable basis for bringing. And that type of, that type of response to those is really important. And I'll tell you, probably about once a month, I see cases now where the defendants are getting a lot more aggressive around those types of things. Because
I saw one just this week that was called out around, getting that counter suit supported.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they want to dismiss their initial claim, and guess what? They can't. They can't. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to, got one more question here I'm going to take, and that's around AI, because, we haven't talked about AI yet, but is AI just unintentionally increasing the amount of fraud in the industry? Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Gosh, there are so many different ways we can take that. So, in my mind, I'm thinking AI and bots that are filling out lead forms. And so, yes, we are definitely seeing that. We're also using a lot more artificial intelligence systems for placing telephone calls, for engaging in text messaging, and the reason I mentioned text messaging too is because with privacy laws and with wiretapping laws, there can be claims around the monitoring of those through the AI aspects of that. So something you really have to be careful with. And AI is a pre-recorded message, and so we have some charts that hopefully, I apologize, I got Margaret the links at the very last minute. They're really good at going through and helping you do that analysis of what type of consent is needed. And because AI is a pre-recorded message, if you're making a marketing call, you need prior express written consent to place that call, which is the part of the rule in the TCPA that was the one-to-one and logically and topically related. That was the part of the TCPA they were modifying, but there are specific requirements that you have to have. And so, just as a result of those types of things, we're seeing a bigger influence of AI on those lawsuits.
Mm-hmm. And I can confirm, I'm looking at our chat now, and you did get the link is posted in our chat. So everyone that heard that and wants to can go in and take a look at that. Right. So please access. There's a few links in chat. So if you guys if our audience just scrolls back up in chat, you'll be able to access some of those other resources and links as well.
And I keep this on my desk too, but it just goes through that analysis of what type of consent you need for do not call and for the various types of technology. So I don't know, I like to think in graphics. So I think it's helpful.
I love it. I've seen that before. I've seen you share that before, and it just takes what can feel very daunting and overwhelming and kind of simplifies it down for
step by step.
Somebody like myself that is not a legal expert can really follow that flow. So I'm kind of curious, just one of the last questions before we move into wrap up is, like, what kinds of big headlines or themes do you anticipate for the rest of this year, maybe kind of going into next year? Either something you're seeing or something you're anticipating.
Well, one of the headlines we're already seeing is just the massive increase in TCPA filings. It was up since the beginning of the year. I think it's already up somewhere around 300 to 400%. I mean, it's an insane amount. I didn't pull those statistics, and I should have before this call, but we are seeing a lot more TCPA class actions being filed in court. One of the trends we've seen lately is the allowable calling times. So it's difficult to know where you're reaching somebody when you call them. And because on the federal level, it's 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., if you call outside of that window, it's a violation of the TCPA. And a lot of companies, what they're defaulting to is that time in the middle that is allowable for all states. So 11 o'clock to 5 o'clock Eastern time, that gives you a calling hour for anywhere in the United States. I would say too, we haven't seen it reintroduced, but the Do Not Disturb Act was proposing calling hours that would have been 9 to 5. So maybe seeing even, just now, what type of response you get calling during those hours. So that is a trend that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. There are state laws that are being introduced regularly on a daily basis. We do legislative monitoring every morning. Aaron Perry from our office comes in and does our legislative monitoring. If you haven't met Aaron, you need to. He's an incredible human being and an amazing attorney. But staying on top of all of those, the states are becoming very aggressive. And then you have those plaintiffs that are located in those states that like stacking claims, the TCPA claims and the state claims, and they are able to do that. So if you think damages are bad at $1,500, they get up to $6,500, for instance, in South Carolina is one of those states that we have one of those kind of professional plaintiffs frequently filing. But, we'll see the stacking of that. And, registration for telemarketers. Texas has, in essence, got a private right of action now. So we're seeing that, just these unique kind of claims. We're seeing truth and caller ID claims too, like we haven't seen before. We have a case that I will say vehemently, it was very wrongly decided, and I haven't checked to see if it's been appealed, but claiming that there is a private right of action under the TCPA for caller identification if you're not complying with the Truth and Caller ID Act, which does not have a private right of action. And a case that court cited in there was actually one of our cases, and they cited it as supporting that theory. But the court, who had originally, in our case, made that same decision, we convinced them how wrong it was, and they reversed it. But the court that had now subsequently asked didn't see that decision was reversed. What they relied on was not actually good case law. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But I'll tell you, things are never boring when it comes to the TCPA, and something that it's a full-time job just keeping up with all those changes.
Wow. That was a lot. I know you and your team will be staying busy. So I'll kind of take us around towards some wrap up here. And so some of the things that I heard that I think are takeaways for the audience are really around put some measures in place to really review your processes and review your plan so you're prepared if you do get a threat or a case or an investigation. Scrutinize your contract terms. Make sure you understand that. Work with someone, either, have someone responsible and accountable in your team, or find some resources outside of your team to help you at a minimum, just kind of review that, help you identify some risk and vulnerability of that. And then continually do that on a periodic basis because things do change. And then finally, audit your practices, like audit your leads, audit as part of that plan, can you go and get that proof of consent quickly and easily to be able to shut a threat down quickly, and audit that so you know what's actually coming to you from your vendors. And so those would be my takeaways I would share. And then Michele, anything you would add to that?
I would just add, do what they're doing right now. Keep educated, attend these types of webinars, get on our mailing list so you get those updates and solid legal analysis from the folks that are doing this every day.
Yes, awesome. Well, again, both of our websites and some resources are posted in chat for everyone to go and follow along. I know we're both doing continuing education in these areas and trying to raise the awareness. And thanks for sharing some of your resources where you've taken some very complex issues and helped make them more digestible by those of us that are not legal experts. And so I really appreciate all that you do to help in the industry as well.
It's very kind of you to say. I appreciate you having me on here today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks to our audience. And let us know if you have any questions and reach out to us online. Thanks, everyone.